Okay, so we are solving radical equations today. Go ahead and put your name on here. And it is currently second hour. Watch your mouth. Okay, radical equations. The radical is a square root. So I had some people say it's long division. It's not long division. Long division doesn't have the little hook on the end of it. This is a square root sign. Square roots are asking you what number times itself equals this number. So for example, the square root of 25 is 5 because 5 times 5 is 25. The square root of 100 is 10 because 10 times 10 is 100. So that's what we're dealing with today is square roots. Square roots are the opposite of squaring. So the opposite of taking a square root is squaring. That's important because when we solve equations, we use opposite operations. So adding is still the opposite of subtraction. Multiplying is still the opposite of dividing. Taking a square root is the opposite of squaring something. So now essentially we have a third set of opposite operations. Here are our steps to solve. Our first step is going to be to isolate the square root. So get rid of everything outside of the square root. Jackson. No way, pay attention. Our second step is going to be to get rid of that square root by squaring both sides of our equation. So you get rid of everything outside the square root, and then you square both sides. I know, it's like one of those words where when you say it a bajillion times, it doesn't sound like a real word anymore. I agree. Okay, you only have to square one time, so in the actual equation. Okay, moving on. Okay, and then the last thing is, once you have gotten the square root by itself, you are going to isolate the variable. So get x by itself. So finish solving for x. Okay, so what we're doing today is pretty detail oriented. You have to pay really close attention to what's outside the square root and what's inside the square root. So as we're going through notes, make sure you're paying attention to the order we do our steps in. That's what's most important. So first problem we've got 3 problems here. They're all on this side. Is square root of 12x over 2 equals 3. So the first thing that we need to do, step 1, is to isolate the square root. So we got to get rid of everything outside the square root. What is inside this square root? 12x. What is outside that square root? The 2 and that 3. So we've got to get rid of that 2 first. So we are going to multiply both sides of our equation by 2. Because currently it's being divided by 2. Opposite of dividing is multiplying. So we'll multiply both sides of our equation by 2. We've got square root of 12x on the left now. Equals, on the right side, 3 times 2 is 6. So we got rid of what we were dividing by first because it was outside the square root. Our next step, we've got square root of 12x. Is there anything on the left side of the equation that is outside the square root? No. So everything on the left side here is underneath the square root. So it is time to square both sides of our equation. So I'm going to square the left side of my equation, and I'm going to square the right side of my equation. When I square something, I am multiplying it by itself. So this square root and square cancel out, and all I have on the left is 12x. On the right side, I'm doing 6 squared. There's 2 ways you can put that in your calculator. You can use the squared button over on the left. So I would type in my 6, and then it's right here, x squared on the left. 6 squared is 36. What other thing can I type in? What? 6 times 6. Because squaring something is just multiplying it by itself. So 6 squared means 6 times 6, which is just 36. Okay. And then from there, it's just a normal equation. So we'll divide both sides by 12. And we will get x equals 3. So it solves just like a normal equation, just at some point, when there's nothing outside the square root on the left side, we have to square both sides of our equation. Any questions so far? Okay. It might seem easy for you, but maybe it's not for other people, okay? So just chill out if you don't have any questions. All right, next one we've got square root of 5x over 2. In this one, the 5x is definitely under the square root. Is that 2 under the square root? So this is where my square root is. Is the 2 inside or outside? Inside. Okay. See how it was outside in this first one, and now it's inside? So because it's inside, we have to get rid of the square root at the beginning in this one. If everything's underneath the square root, before we can touch anything underneath the square root, we got to get rid of it. So we are going to start by squaring both sides here. So square the left, square the right.
There's no difference.
The square root and the square cancel each other out. So I've got 5x over 2 equals. And then what's 5 squared? 25. Why is it 25? 5 times 5. Okay, so the difference between the first one we did and this one is this one, the divided by 2 was outside the square root. This one, the divided by 2 was inside the square root. From here, we just need to finish solving this. We're going to get rid of the dividing by 2. We can do that by multiplying both sides by 2. So now we got 5x equals, because these 2's canceled, 25 times 2, which is 50. Okay. And then we can divide both sides by 5. We get x equals 10. Grab that note sheet right there. Okay. Any questions on either of those first 2? Okay. Last one then. What is inside that square root there? Just the x. So that means I need to get rid of everything else before I can square both sides. So we're going to start by adding 5 to both sides. We're solving it just like a normal equation. So I've got 3 square root of x equals 13 plus 5, which is 18. Then I need to get rid of that 3 because it's outside of the square root. So I get rid of 3 by dividing both sides by 3. I get square root of x equals 18 divided by 3, which is 6. And then to finish us out, the square root is by itself on the left side of my equation now. So I can square both sides of my equation. The square root and the square cancel each other out. So I get x equals, and then what's 6 squared? 36, because it's 6 times 6. Okay. So I picked 3 different examples for 3 different reasons. In this first one, we had to get rid of the 2, and then the square root was by itself, and so we squared both sides and then finished solving. And this one, everything was inside the square root. So we were able to start by just squaring both sides and then solve. And in this one, everything was outside of the square root. So we had to get rid of that plus 5 and divide by 3 before we could square both sides. So 3 different types. Sometimes you square both sides at the beginning, the middle, or the end. Any questions right now? Okay, that's because you missed the entire lesson. So I'm recording it and I will post it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video.